Welcome to the Space Alvey Institute podcast. I'm Andrew Petiprin with Bobby Mixa. Bobby, how are you?
Good, Andrew. I'm excited about this interview. We're with an old colleague, so very excited
An
about
old,
this.
Indeed, an old colleague and a dear friend. It's been nice, actually, as we have had these conversations here on the Space Alvey Institute podcast. We've met some new friends and we've reconnected with some old friends. But today we're just talking to. It's just like the guys back together again. It's just a real joy to see our friend Jared Zimmerer, whom I'll introduce now. Our guest is Dr. Jared Zimmerer, who is adjunct professor of great books and also director of the Extension Strategy and director of the Center for Catholic Media at Benedictine College in Kansas. Jared, how are you?
Doing great, guys. The boys are back in town. That's right.
Boys are in three different towns, but
Exactly.
back together. Absolutely, back in town in a kind of metaphorical way, I guess.
Zoom Town.
Yes.
Zoom Town. Yeah, I wonder if Zoom Town. Let's coin that. Let's hope that catches on. Well, Jared, we're so happy to be talking to you today. Not only because it's just great to catch up, but also because we love what you're doing now, and we just want to kind of share some ideas and kind of shoot the breeze a little bit because as you know, what Bobby and I are doing here is we're trying to kind of put forth the idea of Christian humanism, of the idea of resurrecting a Christian society, of looking to the old world for kind of marks of faith that we can kind of continue to place our hope in as we kind of live ourselves in the new world and wherever we are in the world. So, I guess I'll just start with this. Like what the work that you're doing at Benedictine, how do you kind of see that as carrying forward the same kind of vision? Humanism, Christian society, kind of equipping people for the work that lies ahead of us.
Well, there's a lot of different aspects. As you can tell, I have several titles as far as my work is concerned, but largely as a college, it is a deeply faithful Catholic community founded by Benedictine monks and sisters back in 1858. So it has this long tradition here. And when I first came to campus, you can literally feel not only the beauty of the campus, it's a very beautiful campus, beautiful buildings, very old buildings. I feel like I actually work in a castle because the way the outside looks. And there's just Catholicism everywhere. It's in the water, from the president down to the students to every professor. They all profess the faith in this very unique and passionate way. They don't all necessarily agree on the aesthetics of what that looks like, but it's always an agreement with the magisterium and the creed of the faith, which is just a beautiful thing to have here. So you see that inculcated into our students through our student life and things like that. But then we also have a very thriving and growing great books program. So thinking of the old world, bringing it to the new. I actually teach two ancient books courses here on campus. We have 4 different great books semesters, basically. So if you want to graduate with a full great books course certificate, that's what you have to go through, is basically 4 semesters of it. And so, you get to see in these young students these old ideas come alive. And that's one reason I fell in love with great books, is just because these questions, these what Mortimer Adler called the great ideas, they're so enduring that even to a young 18-year-old who is just coming out of high school, you can have them read something like Plato's Symposium and still talk about these great ideas that Plato himself was writing over 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, right? So to me, that is a beautiful way of introducing people to an old way of thinking. And we're also not necessarily anti-tech here. Benedictine College is actually known as one of the STEM schools amongst the kind of Newman Guide schools. We have a great nursing program here. It's actually the #1 in the state of Kansas. We've got a great engineering program here. So we try to integrate all of that. So we have our athletes going through great books. We have our engineers going through great books. They all get a flavor of that. But then also with the Center for Catholic Media, so that actually does 2 different things. One is that it creates content for the market to college, or sorry, for the college to market itself, to give a little bit about our professors, maybe offer a series of teaching courses from our professors. But then we also have a fellowship program where we have students that may not be a journalism or marketing student here or a major here, So we have theology students that are learning how to do Catholic media well. So they learn how to film, they learn how to post-produce, they learn how to create podcasts, things like that. And we coach them through it. We give them the right tools. We help them make connections into the real world if they want to go into journalism or if they want to go into media. So it's kind of forming the next generation of young people to go out into the world. And one thing I love about Benedictine College is that it's not afraid of the culture at all. It wants Catholic lawyers, it wants Catholic politicians, it wants Catholic, football head coaches. All of these things go out into the world and bring what you've learned here out into it. So that whole idea of taking the old ways or this Christian humanism that is just kind of in the waters here out into the world.
I love that. If I could just follow up real quick, just an observation that I'm increasingly interested in making is, I look out at a place like Benedictine that has a great books program, and I think, how in generations past, great books would have just been synonymous with a university education, right? But we're living in this different era now, and so I think it's wonderful that it's kind of in line with something Bobby and I have talked about a lot with Pope Benedict's thinking about, what's the term, Bobby, about creative minorities, right? Like that there are, increasingly that this is what the church and the culture will need, that what used to be just kind of taken for granted and was in the tap water, right, is now only, kind of in a jug that you get in a town outside of Kansas City, Kansas, or whatever, right? Like, and so what? That's great. I think that's just terrific. So just a real sign of hope, I think.
We see it as kind of a rippling effect, right? Like you get formed here, you get trained here. This is a residential college. So almost all the students live on campus within walking distance of the main faculty buildings. And so there's a real community here that you have for 4 years that really forms you well to go back out into the real world and be successful in a material, but especially a spiritual sense.
It's interesting too that a lot of these colleges that are really taking their Catholic colleges that are taking their Catholicism seriously, but like you said, Andrew, integrating all of the bringing forth the great intellectual tradition of the church, but also in humanism and as represented in the great books program. Those colleges, Catholic colleges, seem to be flourishing and actually I don't know all the data, Jared, but financially somewhat secure compared to some of the other Catholic colleges and universities that have watered down their identity as a Catholic school. Those are the schools that students are, parents are definitely maybe taking seriously, and then the students as well. So, Jared, how is it go? I've heard project from some other people related to Benedictine that actually Benedict is in a pretty good position compared to some other schools.
So we just had our largest graduating class in history. And we also just brought in, so this past fall, we brought in our largest freshman class in history. So it's doubled enrollment in under 10 years. So that is, I think, a sure sign of what's going on here. I also think that, the United States just dropped below 1.6 birth rate, which is below replacement rate. However, amongst Catholic families that go to Mass once a week, it's almost double that. So they are like the only demographic that's growing. I would imagine that also includes the immigration Hispanic community as well. And so with that, you've got these families that are faithful Catholic families that don't want to send their kids to watered down Catholic schools or at worst state schools that are teaching them some of the worst ideologies in the cultural milieu right now. And so they know if I send my kid to, just a local state school without some kind of, serious formation and kind of protective idea around it, they might come out a very different person. So knowing that they can send their child to a place that is a safe environment where they can be intellectually curious and still be taught the truth, I think that that's really, really attractive. I now have about to be a junior in high school. And so knowing that this is a viable option for him really gives me ease because I just, I can't imagine sending him to even like KU or some of these other places in Kansas. The potential dangers involved in that, especially ideological dangers, is what I'm concerned about as a parent. And so I would imagine there's a lot of parents that see it that way too.
Yeah, our listeners should know that you've more than done your part for the population with your six children. And
Yeah.
it occurs to me too, Jared, that I know that your undergraduate degree was from a state university, and so you know whereof you speak, right? In terms of like what a young person gets from a university experience, both on now the kind of Catholic college side, and then just kind of your typical state university, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy too because I mean, my undergrad that was 20 years ago, and already then we were discussing gay marriage and things like that in the classroom, and I was one of the lone wolves that was like, yeah, I don't think this is good for society, and that was 20 years ago. So I can only imagine. I mean, the whole transsexual ideology and all that kind of stuff that was not even remotely discussed at that time.
Yeah.
So the fact that now it's rampant, and I'm hearing stories from very, very small towns where the public schools, small high schools, small grade schools are now having major issues with that ideological problem in particular. So I can only imagine what these big universities are dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was at St. Louis University, I think it was the year before I graduated. So that was like I graduated in 2009, 2008. They just opened up this new student center, and they also had I think I don't know if it was a new student group, but the the group that got the prominent office at a Catholic university in its student center was the LGBT group. Now, I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into this, but the it's interesting that that got the kind of like prime real estate. But anyways, Jared, you've done a ton on the thought of like shaping the moral imagination, and also your work on Russell Kirk, because I believe you wrote your PhD dissertation on the work of Russell Kirk. So perhaps maybe we can get into this. Andrew and I were just talking about some of the great talks you've given in the past. So and then all the way back so many years ago, Jared, we were talking about education all the time, and then connecting it to Plato and the great tradition, leading out and guiding to the light. So, like, how do you see it? Like, you know, how do you see like what is the if you had to articulate kind of the educational vision of Benedictine, maybe you can I don't know describe that for us.
Yeah, so I mean, largely Benedictine College is holding on to the Benedictine tradition, right? Which is ultimately the great ideas. It is ultimately holding on to truths, whether or not we agree with them. The monks continuing to copy, Plato and the like as the Vikings are coming up and, destroying their monasteries. That was something they held very, very dear. And along with that, the terms of hospitality, community, and the like, that we are a community of men and women bound by faith and scholarship. All of us are gearing towards faith and scholarship. And I've always loved that term, the moral imagination, and I stole it from Russell Kirk. Russell Kirk stole it from Edmund Burke. Ultimately, it's in his Reflections of the Revolution in France. And what he's talking about there is not necessarily a logical ordeal or just something that pulls the heartstrings. Rather, he says it's the thing that keeps us from being naked apes. I mean, it's the thing that inspires us to be something better than just the mere now, right? Or just the mere materialistic thing in front of us. There's something ultimately there's something ultimately in the imagination that when you grab the imagination, there are certain logical truths that if you don't hit the imagination with it, it's just an argument. It's one argument among many. But if you're able to grab the imagination, to grab the way you see the world. And this is one thing that actually attracted me to Russell Kirk because, I was raised in a typical Southern, Texan conservative household, watching Rush Limbaugh and Fox News and, concerned about our guns and all that kind of stuff. Which I agree with still most of that. But when I first encountered Russell Kirk, I say that he gave a poetic spin to the idea of conservatism, or at least a poetic language to it that was much more inspiring than just, well, it's my rights. It's my right to have a gun. It's my right to have free speech. It's like, no, there's something far more inspirational and far deeper, that it's a matter of the heart, the mind, the human person, human dignity. All of that language was kind of wrapped in what he meant by conservatism. And so I really grabbed onto that. And so his whole understanding of moral imagination, I think that that's what he's trying to accomplish, is reach the moral imagination. Many of your viewers and listeners might or might not know that he was also an author of ghost stories.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
actually where he made most of his money, was writing ghost stories. But he called those experiments in the moral imagination. He said there's something to the macabre, there's something to the mysterious, the dark, the fearful, that's able to grab the imagination in a way that if I were to just tell you the truths of
Mhm.
what my ghosts are trying to tell you in some kind of Aristotelian logical form, it just where's the punchiness? Where's the liveliness behind that? And so for him, the moral imagination is something that real formation, real education, the kind that's happening here at Benedictine College, is to capture the whole person, not
Yeah.
just the mind, but everything, and inspire you to something better.
Jared, really quickly, it just occurred to me when you were describing this, and Russell Kirk, would you describe Russell Kirk as like a romantic? Because you put to like the imagination, the macabre, just seems to fit. And you mentioned Edmund Burke, I mean, who seemingly is like the writings on the sublime, as in that. Would you say in that tradition? Would you say that?
Yeah, so he said that he sees himself as a Gothic imagination, medieval in its form.
Hmm.
So like his favorite thing is looking up and seeing old gargoyles
Hmm.
on homes and churches. So there's I would say he's romantic, maybe not a romanticist in the sense of like the romantic tradition,
Hmm.
but certainly romantic in the sense of he sees the romantic in everything. There's something beyond just the statue itself of a gargoyle. There's something behind that that he sees.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, this is something we've talked a lot about, Jared, Bobby, and I, the three of us in the past for sure. Um, I think like I think if you are really serious about having a Christian society in modernity or kind of through modernity or whatever, I think it is romanticism. You have to be a romantic. And so I think like when you look at people like Kirk, T.S. Eliot, all these people that we kind of hold up, they're all romantics, and so are we, and we're kind of unabashed about that. Something that you were saying before, though, I want to pick up a little more about Kirk and Burke, but I don't want to miss the chance to make this point, which is, and get your comments on it, that, we as Catholics and as intellectuals are always sort of, we're always dwelling in this space where um, there are always concerns about whether, like appropriateness or like, violence or, all these kinds of things, right? And, I have tended to take the perspective, like in my own writing about films, for example, that it's far better to err on the side of like the kind of stuff that Pope Benedict talks about like a kind of healthy shock, like you were talking
Hmm.
about before with the Kirk ghost stories. Do you find like in your kind of not just your interactions with students, but just in your, your writing, your speaking, your interactions with colleagues and stuff like that, do you find that like people are pretty like your typical kind of faithful but kind of intellectual Catholic shares that view?
Yeah, it's movies is one thing. I think literature is another, in my experience. When it comes to shock within literature, especially just a really great story, there are some that are all for that. When it comes to film, when it comes to like violence or other aspects of it, there's people on the other side of the fence of that one. But
Sure.
I think in general, though, a Catholic should be anything but boring. And so if
Mhm.
a story is boring,
Hmm.
what's the point? So there's got to be something that's got to grab a hold of you and pull you in to whatever that world is. And sometimes, and almost, I mean, always, it requires a bit of a shock. We're actually doing a project on Miles Connolly, the author of Mr. Blue here at the Center for
Hmm.
Catholic Media, who was also friends with Frank Capra and several other Hollywood actors, but he wrote, I think, 5 or 6 books. And he too, in the 20s, said one of the biggest problems with Catholic authors is that they're boring.
Mhm.
So to me, to
Well,
be romantic, to grab you, pull you in, whether that's through, the potential of like an O'Connor, Flannery O'Connor type violence, or through
Mhm.
like, I mean, Russell Kirk's ghost stories get really dark, really bloody, and very weird. And they're pulling you into something. So Kirk did it because he said, the dead have something to teach us. And
hmm.
so we are, in Chesterton's terms, the democracy of the dead. Like we wouldn't even be alive without the dead. And so, of course, they're going to shock you if they show up. Like that
Mhm.
should be an expectation almost.
Yeah, and don't you think too, like the Catholic tradition, whether it's in the kind of realist portraiture or whatever, like, or sculpture like Michelangelo's Pietà or David or something like that, or in the kind of more fantastical thing like Dante,
Mhm.
um, you're encountering anything but just a kind of nice, neat, wrapped up sort of isn't that a sweet moral message kind of thing, right? And it's certainly not trying to be some kind of separate marketing category of, the world does this, but we do this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I
So,
think yeah, it seems to me like the Catholic vision of the world is the brightest and most colorful. And so it takes all of the human emotions and almost place them at their highest pitch, whether that's
mhm,
sadness, whether that's joy, whether that's love, whether that's hate. We don't want to like just kind of hollow ourselves out. I love that you bring up Eliot because Kirk was obviously very inspired by him and loved his poetry. But the idea of the hollow men,
mhm.
we've flattened ourselves out, and so that vigor of life it dies if we don't have these moments or these pieces of literature or film or whatever it might be that bring us back. And I think today, I mean, we can definitely get into this later if you want, but film in particular plays, I think, a role in the modern world for this.
Yeah, I have to say something though. The Pietà and Michelangelo's
Oh,
David.
all right. I forgot
I
you hate Michelangelo. Okay, go
No,
ahead.
he's fine, but I just was thinking, I'm like, okay, heck, I take Caravaggio any day
Okay, yeah,
over some of this
fair
stuff
point.
because I mean, if you're like the shock value, I don't know, the Pietà just is a little bit too, I don't know. It tends I mean, it almost seems fitting that it could look like kitsch when you have it, on your desk. But okay, I won't go down that
I
route.
can tell you
But
too that Kirk, I mean, just for one quick point, if we're talking about pieces of art, he was a fan of Rene Riddell, who was an
mm,
expressionist of the 1900s. And if you look up her pieces, it's very Picasso-esque and very
Hmm.
kind of dark. He really thought there was something to that it was kind of a mirror of what we're looking at ourselves. We've disassociated ourselves from the form of beauty, and now we're looking at a new kind of beauty, but it's not ordered properly.
Yeah. That raises something that I think about a lot. Like there's a certain type of conservative intellectual that really loves T.S. Eliot, but doesn't like somebody like Picasso or Dali, which to me is really strange. I think I think it's one thing to say like modernism is very problematic in lots of different ways, but I actually think like the modernist artistic tradition is a really important expression of romanticism. And I think it ran out of gas and like whatever it was doing by breaking everything apart, it got too far apart. We talked about this, Bobby, you and I with Billy Newton a while
yeah.
ago. But I think for what it was at the time, it's terrific. And in so many respects, Jared, and maybe you can pick it up here. Like, we've talked in the past, right, about that like collection of intellectuals that was thinking about some of these questions of Christian society up to the start of World War II.
Hmm.
And like in some respects, their project has been completely abandoned and we need to pick
Mhm.
it up again. But they're all modernists in a way, right?
Hmm.
Yes. Yeah, and they were all kind of appreciators of expression.
Yeah.
So sort of like the Chesterton fence with the children. It's like
Hmm.
let's get right up to that fence, and that's perfectly okay. Let's test out what's still orthodox, but yet maybe a little strange.
Hmm.
I always love almost every time I talk about Kirk, I always make a joke that he was likely more comfortable with the Addams family than the Leave It to Beaver family,
Yeah, I love that you
because
say that.
the
Yeah.
that whole idea of like the bourgeois, buttoned up, perfect, whatever, he would hate that. That is not what he was about. And he was certainly not about, flattening everything where everybody has the same things and the same job and you have your 9 to 5 and he just was not that kind of person. he was far more into the strange. And it's funny, if you go to his ancestral home in Macasta, they have these wonderful pieces of art that are just the most random. Like they've got this like random lion head sticking out of their door that doesn't really, but it's beautiful. And they've got, so
Mm.
an old church was abandoned. They took all of the stained glass and just put it in their house. They've got these arches, all of this stuff. And he did all of that because he's like, I don't want just, the basic. I really want something strange and unique. And to me, that kind of flips the idea of conservatism on its head, given the fact that he's kind of considered the father of American conservatism. But he has major issues with individualism. He has major issues with neoconservatism. He had major issues with a lot of the wars that were being fought. It's a very different when we're talking about Kirk as a conservative versus where the American right has found itself.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that I would rather hang out with the Addams family, to be honest, than the Beavers.
Oh, heck
Well,
yeah.
it's amazing that, a lot of these figures, like Andrew, I think you were hinting at when things were dropped in like the 1940s, around the time of the Second World War. Maybe you were hinting at the book, The Year of Our Lord,
Yeah.
1943, with the Mute and T.S. Eliot, Christopher Dawson, and a number of other figures meeting, and actually, trying to lay the foundations for the new order that's going
Mhm.
to, and what's the education going to look like, and shaping people in their immoral imagination. But it seems to me, with what Kirk did, I learned about I think the agrarian tradition, the famous agrarians from, is it in the conservative mind? I'm not sure,
One of
but
the founders is,
okay.
I forgot what his name was, but yes, it is mentioned.
Yeah, but just picking up like all these traditions that, maybe because of some of the, the problems of the South and the Southern tradition, that were abandoned, but there were good elements there. And it wasn't until there was a guy it's actually taken some strange individual, maybe not strange, but people who take some, let's say in the American context, unorthodox views, like Eugene Genovese, who is the famous communist historian on the South, to kind of look at things like the Southern tradition and say, hey, we need to really take some elements here and bring it. It comes from America, and we need to actually really, in some ways, reinvigorate those things. But it seems to me that like something like T.S. Eliot and what those guys like Dawson, I know you're a huge Dawson fan too, Jared, what they were trying to do needs to be really reinvigorated. And that's what we're trying, I think, Andrew, and what we're trying to kind of do. But I mean, Jared, do you like with a conservative, I mean, like what would Russell Kirk, what do you think his like advice would be today? Sorry, I'm kind of going off into this direction. What would be his like advice today, in the context that we're in? Like, where would he have us look? Like, what works? Or maybe we just need to actually have a reprinting of the conservative mind.
Yeah. Yeah, I think which it's on its seventh or eighth printing at this point.
Oh,
Given
wow.
it
Okay.
was
Then
printed in
maybe not.
1954. So
Okay.
um so that's a tough question to ask because there's so many different facets to it. He had such a passion for a certain type of education that now we would call it a great books education, but really
Hmm.
he would have just called it education or proper formation. He was very much a Newman fan in regard to the idea of university and several of those other pieces in regard to assent and the like. But then you also have like the societal problems as well. He was not a huge fan of these major big cities. He was much more of a fan of the smaller humane level of city planning. We've talked about his understanding of architecture as well. So he's got all of these different things, and ultimately, though, pointing back to the moral imagination, it's because every single one of these things have something to do with the moral imagination. If the architecture you see is ugly, it's going to make you think of ugliness, right? If the city around you is nothing but a beehive, you're just going to turn into one number amongst many, right? If there's no beautiful architecture around you, if you're not formed in beautiful music, beautiful art, it's just going to sort of like demean the human person. It's going to demean human dignity. And so when that happens, that's how you end up with the situation that we're at. I do find it funny, or not funny, more interesting, that all of those thinkers knew whatever the order that has kept us together since Christendom, there's something coming to an end. They all kind of sensed that. And it's interesting that it was right before, World War II, which, I mean, literally blew up that world, and caused it, almost forced it to create something new. Um, and so thinking of how they would see where society is at now, I don't think they could even imagine some of the social issues we're
Yeah.
dealing with now. And so for them, so my dissertation, I actually claimed Russell Kirk as a personalist, which goes back to John Paul II, Jacques Maritain, and a lot of those thinkers that are found in those
Oh,
pre-1940
interesting.
days. And the reason being is because you have this tradition of the humanist tradition, which I would say personalism is still within the humanist tradition. But when I think of humanism, I think much more in regard to like a cultural expression of this is what human beings have been able to bring into this world through our great beauty, our poetry, our philosophy, all these types of things. But a personalist philosophy is far more interested in what is the human person. It boils it down to that. And so if you have to ask that question, well, now you have to ask the question of, well, if that's the human person, what should a government look like? If that's the human person, what should our architecture look like? What should our schools look like? What should our families look like? It all boils down to what's good for the human person as both an individual and a person of the community, not one or the other, right? Not a extreme individualism nor a communism. And so I think that, and that's where Kirk finds himself. So that's why I kind of made that claim. But I think that's the big question of like, are we asking that question? What's good for the human person? And that's why I think Great Books is thriving, because that's what it's in the end, whether we talk about war, whether we talk about love, whether we talk about angels, a lot of it boils down to how does that affect me and my human dignity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? At the very end of Eugene Genovese's little book called the Southern Tradition, he mentions John Paul II as
Really?
like, yeah, this is in like that personalism that you're talking about, Jared, is kind of like the way forward. So I just
Wow.
just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, it seems to me, to pick up on what you were saying before, Jared, a question that I like to pose is, does such and such, whatever it is, make us more human? I
Yes.
think about this with questions of technology all the time. I'm kind of just obsessed with this now. 2 years ago, we would hear the term artificial intelligence or AI, and it was just a kind of, I don't know, whatever that, and now, I mean, it's just in the water all the time. I mean, like, that's just the issue of the day, and that's not the only one. But you say this to people, you say, okay, tell me how this makes me more human. And they're sort of like, well, I don't know. I mean, it saves you time. I don't know. I mean, it just seems like all the answers don't actually point to this fundamental question of what is a human being. And I was thinking about this when I was taking a look again. Bobby mentioned your great talk called Moral Imagination, which you gave a couple years ago at a conference, and I was there in the room when you gave it. I don't remember if Bobby was there or not, but it's a really great
It was
talk,
in
and you got
Phoenix,
into
right? Yeah.
yeah, it was in
Mhm.
Phoenix, yeah.
Okay.
But you anyway, you got into a lot of the stuff we've already been talking about. But there's one place, and I had completely forgotten about this. We used to talk about this a lot when we were together. You mentioned that video of the Japanese animator Hayao what's his name? Hayao Miyazaki. I always forget his name,
Mhm.
even though I love his movies. Hayao Miyazaki, right? Who's the director of My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away and so many great movies. And there's this video that exists on the internet of someone showing him this like robot thing. I don't know, maybe you can just tell us what it is, but basically it's like this man who draws things and puts them on a screen, right? So I mean, somebody who clearly is like showing people things that aren't just like, not just flesh and blood, right? He looks at this representation and he's like, this is diabolical. This is anti-human, you know?
Mhm.
Tell
Yeah.
us about that, and maybe just use that as a jumping off point for whatever else you want to say about
So
that.
it was actually an experiment in AI of they put in a prompt into AI, and it was supposed to be create basically a walking human person. And the thing was it almost looked even less than a zombie. It was so bent over and like twisted, and one foot was one way and the other was the other way, and it was kind of like slinking along like this
Yeah, it's
like broken
gruesome. Yeah.
caterpillar. And he was just like, and they were looking at him like he's going to be so excited. And he's like, this is an abomination. Like this is
Hmm.
diabolical. And then you see him later and he's like smoking a cigarette and he's like, I don't know what we're gonna do. Like this is, the end of it type of
And don't
thing.
you think, just to interrupt you again and then throw it back to you, but don't you think like nowadays, like our critic or my critic, whatever, somebody who doesn't like my perspective on certain technological questions might come back to me and say, but it's so much better now. Look, I mean, that was a few years ago or whatever. And I would reply, that makes it even worse. That makes it even worse, right? I mean, that takes us closer to like a Blade Runner situation where it's like, it's even worse because at least where you've got the gruesome thing that's like flailing around, like at least you can look at that and go, that is something that people want us to like take seriously, but obviously we won't. But if it's like something that really looks and walks and talks like a human, that's even worse in my opinion, even
Could be your
scarier.
wife, yeah, like in Blade Runner.
Right. We got to do like this complicated test to find out what it really is. I don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah, my friend here, a philosopher named Jim Madden, he's a professor of philosophy here. He's written a couple books, one of which is about AI or has a chapter on AI. We had a conversation about this, and he said, it's interesting because he said, obviously AI is on its way, right? It's here. Unless we voluntarily give up this kind of power, it's just going to be in the cultural waters. He said, but what it's forcing us to do is, what is the difference between a human person and AI?
Mhm.
And he's like, AI can't think. It can't think for itself. All it does is gather data and place data out in a logical form. It obviously can't love because there is no connection with human persons. There is no, feelings involved in AI. And even if there is, it's just a contraption. It's just kind of like theater. It's not actual, I would literally die for you type love. That just would never exist in there. And I kind of like that perspective of like, if this forces us to go back and say, wait a minute, okay, so we're kind of offloading a lot of our information onto this thing so that it's easier to gather and potentially create. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's ever going to be us,
Mhm.
right? And I think that that's the right kind of separation. Like you, I have very serious concerns about it, especially when it comes to like psyops and stuff like that. That I think that this could very easily be used to do. And I also think that AI could, I don't know, I don't know, it could turn out not well. Um,
I mean, it's all the Terminator, Jared. It's
exactly,
all headed
exactly.
kind of,
Um,
we're all heading there.
but to try to take the Christian hope
Yeah.
behind even this, I
Well,
think there is something to be said about that.
maybe kind of along these lines, it seems like maybe rediscovery of idolatry would be helpful to see like, hey, well, maybe we are thinking of ourselves too much in these terms of like thinking as something just like computation. So
Mm.
perhaps maybe to like knock this idol down, we can rediscover like what you're suggesting, Jared, and this richer sense of what it means to be a human, and kind of what the romantics were trying to do as well. So,
AI will never write Shakespeare, right?
yeah.
So no matter what it does offer, it will always be flatter than what a human person can provide because it just doesn't have the moral imagination. It just doesn't have what that takes.
I think though, yeah, I think that's right. I think that what you said before is kind of the only way forward as far as like, in a sense, like we just have to choose to be more human. Because the thing that I fear is that you're absolutely right. The AI will never write Shakespeare, but my worry is that human beings won't know the difference, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it won't matter because no one will care. Uh,
yeah.
but anyway, that it's getting bleak. I know. That's not what we're about. Because I do, like I said before, I mean, I do think that that even the idea of choosing to be a human might be the sort of creative minority that we were talking about before. And that might start with something like going and reading books for 4 years or whatever, right? At a place like Benedictine.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that we also because of um and we've talked about this before, because of we don't really have a culture, rather we have a lot of like cultures, and we get to choose. And I think Heidegger would have a lot to say about if you get to choose something, is it really a given that that's for you, right?
Hmm.
And so it's one of those things of like, now we have to choose our community. We have to choose where we're going to mass, because there's multiple ways of attending mass. We have to choose which education we're going to get, because there's not one education, there's many. We have to choose, like it's all of this choice. And to me, it's a little bit of the backlash of this kind of like limitless freedom that we've been given. And I think that we're in this moment where I'm hoping you do see on social media and the like that people are kind of waking up to the lies we've been told. A lot of that curtain has been brought down, but it doesn't necessarily answer the kind of anxious question, right? The kind of existential question of who am I? What am I? What do I belong to? What am I willing to die for? It's all just choice.
Hmm.
And so I think that that is something that, luckily, as Catholics, we do have a place to go for answers and for a central answers of faith and truth and things like that. But when it comes to like human expression, culture, it's all choice. And that just seems it's the first time in history it's ever happened. So I think we're still kind of dealing
Right.
with what does it actually mean?
Well, as Heidegger said in that Der Spiegel interview, only a God can save us. But perhaps maybe he should have, not abandoned his Catholicism
Yeah.
early on. But maybe he should have been trying to do a little bit what we're trying to do, rediscover that a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing how maybe there's going to be a point where uh, it's just the logic of this civilization just has to play itself out in a way where it's almost like you just have to, like, I don't know, just suffer in this
Mhm.
age for something finally. God, I mean, I personally think that God's probably just going to let the providence of this is in his providential ordering, it's just going to destroy itself. And so then with the destruction, there will be perhaps maybe actually there be some kind of something new, like in that book, what the Canticle of
Angela Leibowitz,
Leibowitz.
yeah.
Yeah.
Leibowitz. So, and it's good you're at
But
Benedictine, Jared. So,
well, let me add this though, and maybe then Jared, you would have further thoughts on this. I think though, right, Bobby, that like the conservative would say, let's hope not. Like let's like kind of
yeah,
try to like shore up the walls as much as we can. And in other words, like I love the image that Roger Scruton uses of like, like there's such a strong temptation to just stare into the void.
yeah,
But like that's the thing we can't do.
yeah.
We just can't do that.
Well, otherwise, why would we even be, trying to do something in the first
Right.
place? But not trying to, though, I don't know, do something that's going to be on the same terms as the culture,
Right.
and just continuing something that isn't that just goes with that stream.
Yeah, one of the reasons I actually really like being here as well is this is going to take multiple generations of change. As much as I would love to see it in my own lifetime, likely never going to happen. And so to form kids into going into the real world and understanding what's right, true, good, and beautiful, like that's the way out of this, I think. And it starts
Yeah.
with the small, because it started with the small. I mean, this we did not end up in this situation from some kind of top-down force thing. It was slow growth over time, over multiple centuries, really. And so if we're going to try to find some sense of order, things will fall to the side along the way. But the conservative thing is like, I'm going to go right through it with joy and love, and I'll be the one to help reconstruct as we build up. I don't want the thing to fall apart. We especially don't want things to get ugly, in a, like I say, a violent sense or something. But we do know like this thing can't last. It just can't. And so we know what can, and that's what we're holding on to, and that's what gives us hope.
Yeah. Do you think to that end that that's sort of the way we ought to think about evangelism as well? Because I mean, I respect people who have a more that they're more kind of have a more technical or kind of technique oriented evangelism. That's fine. That's just not really my style. Mainly because I look to, the past, to Christian civilization, and see like evangelism was living in Christian society. That's what it was, and of course there's always the wheat and the chaff together. That's a given. But there's really no better way for a person to be a Christian than to live in a Christian world. So, but that's, as you say, like a maybe even more than generations long strategy. But I think it's probably one we need more people to commit to.
Mhm. Yeah, I think too that we tend to, granted, I think that style does have a role to play. Like you, it's not really my
Right.
particular style. But sometimes I think about like, if you were to go to, let's say this is like pre-Christian Scandinavia, and you're going to go and just debate. I
Hmm.
don't necessarily see that going anywhere.
Right.
I see much longer strategical moves, including we're going to start a little monastery over here and
Yeah.
send 3 monks. Oh, they got killed. So send a couple more
Right.
monks over there. Oh, this king over here is looking for a bride for his son. Well, we have a beautiful French princess that could, help out in a little way to just introduce the ideas that Christians aren't all nuts and that this is a good thing for your society.
Yeah.
Like there was all kinds of ways to capture the imagination, and it wasn't just I'm going to show up and list out our dogmas, and all of a sudden now you're all believers. It's like no, Boniface came in and chopped down our holy tree that we thought was
Yeah.
sacred,
Mhm.
and we couldn't kill him because we were also kind of scared of him. Like that kind of evangelism is where we're getting, because
Yeah.
we're now in a kind of re-paganized society. We just have a lot of like baptized pagans.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they think that they've heard it and rejected it, but really they haven't actually heard it. But the problem with that style, again, I do think it plays a role, but it's not capturing the imagination. And it's this kind of strategy that they understood. We have to get the imagination of these people because they're very, very keen on some kind of spiritual sense. And I think even today there is a spiritual sense of sorts, whether or not it's light or dark. There is something in the cultural waters right now that people do want some sense of the spiritual. And like that's where we have to go. That
Yeah.
that imagination in that place. That's why I like Thomas Merton, because he goes into that space, regardless of you agree or not. I'm going to find what's right in there and kind of pull you in that direction. And the Newman way of ascent, which is not just intellectual, right? It's conversations, it's epiphanies, it's experiences, it's all of these other things that come together to finally go, oh, that's kind of what this is all about. And then finally that one argument does it for you.
Yeah.
Right. And so to me, like that's what they were doing in the medieval and or in the pre medieval world whenever they started gathering Christian nations around themselves, because they understood that if we just send in our scholars, their warriors aren't going to like that.
Yeah. But it's interesting, like with the evangelization. I mean, you hear like they ask Jesus, "Well, where are you staying?" And it just seems to me, even with education, Jared, maybe you should invite for next year at Benedictine College for the commencement speech. Maybe you should invite Matthew Crawford.
Oh, I
Just a
love that.
suggestion, because like I don't know, like this now is bringing up some things, some insights he had on education, where like. Um, there were many like schools in like I mean in the Middle East and in Asia that were like loaded with money, but they didn't have the actual masters, like master scientists themselves actually living there. And so they had all of the kind of like textbook knowledge that you could learn and study at these schools. But there was something that wasn't, then that knowledge wasn't necessarily making these people like scientists. And so
Mhm.
there was like a way of seeing the world that was necessary. It was necessary to live with the scientist almost, or be an apprentice to him or her, to actually get that. And there's a guy I know we both like Michael Polanyi, and that personal knowledge of actually that kind of you can't really, it's hard to articulate, but this kind of feeling for, it's almost like a poetic sense, like you said, like a poetic sense for what, like the way the world is. That, you know, you need to be with people who have that in order to capture it. So this is like my hope, kind of, because I often am thinking, oh gosh, can AI replace me as a teacher? Because I'm like, oh my gosh, ChatGPT that can come up with a lesson plan like that and give all the kids all the historical knowledge and bullet points that they need. But, you know, I got an email from a mom yesterday, and she said, you know, hey, thanks for kind of being a mentor to my son. And I was thinking, ChatGPT can't do that. So I was like, you know what? I'm hoping that eventually, like you said, evangelization, teaching, whatever it may be, it just can't be replaced by, you know, some technology, or just giving all the, or it's not Father Justin. It's, I guess, just Justin. So hopefully Justin won't replace all all apologists, or even maybe there'll be like a Father Evan, the evangelist or something. It won't come out. So, anyways.
Yeah, you're right. I think that like when it comes to things like education, I mean, I think of history a lot when it comes to that because I mean it's one thing to know, let's say, all of the dates of the Napoleonic Wars, where
Mm.
they happened, how many soldiers were at each. You don't know a damn thing about Napoleon just because of that, right?
Mhm.
You have to know the person in history in order to really understand the history itself. And that includes the soldiers, that includes the cultures that were involved and affected. It's a major difference between data points and the human thing.
Yeah,
So like AI might be able to give you all of the information about Napoleon, but you still don't know Napoleon. Like it,
yeah.
you really need to understand him.
You
Yeah, and
gotta
how
go.
much?
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
go
no,
ahead,
no.
Mark.
Sorry, no. You gotta go to France, maybe. So,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and even if you never go to France, and even if you do forget all the dates and everything about Napoleon, you might remember the teacher that you had that kind of in some kind of intangible way helped you understand how to live in reality better. You know, I don't know, I'm getting too poetic now on that, but I think, I mean, I don't know, I think back to times in high school or college and certain things that I learned. And I don't know, it's much more a question of who I was around and what the experience of learning itself was like.
Absolutely. So I actually attribute a lot of my educational trajectory to one teacher in high school named Mr. Lawson, who was an atheist, who was our literature professor my senior year. Wasn't there the rest of the other years. Wore a tweed jacket with like the leather elbows and smoked, you know, cigars and stuff, and was kind of gruff. But he actually opened up like Shakespeare and Homer and all these people. I'm like, wait, what? Like I've never heard it like this before. And he would actually come up and just talk to us in the hallways about movies that are coming out and you know, like legitimately wanted to be around us. I was just kind of a meathead that I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And all of a sudden now I'm like, I think I want to read Cicero because of this guy. You know, like what a strange interaction with somebody who didn't have the same faith, but just had this like poetic sense about him and this kind of like weirdness about him, but was really cool at the same time. And I was like, this is, if that's what this is, then I'm down for whatever this is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've just scratched the surface, but I'm afraid we're just about out of time. So, on that note, Jared, thank you so much for taking the time to shoot the breeze with us a little bit today.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys.
So good to be with you. Our guest has been Dr. Jared Zimmerer of Benedictine College. If you enjoyed what you saw or heard in this podcast, please do give us a 5-star review and share the episode. Check out our website, spacesalviinstitute.com, and sign up for our emails. Until next time, God bless and live